around the world.
Under Bush, that threat was extending to Putin's own backyard.
Responsibility around the world to extend freedom.
Popular uprisings in former Soviet republics.
Bush really believes that democracy can be planted almost anywhere.
Americans respect your courageous choice for liberty. The American people will stand with you.
Putin concluded that these were efforts by the United States and our intelligence services to, in fact, install in these neighboring countries regimes that would be anti-Russian.
Putin had seen enough. He would fight back.
Russian President Vladimir Putin is speaking at an international conference in Germany.
He'd do it in Munich, Germany, issuing a warning to America and the world.
And so he comes to the security conference in Munich and says, basically, I don't have to mince words, do I? I can say what's on my mind. And then he just lashes out and he lists all these resentments.
Прежде всего, конечно, Соединенных Штатов перешагнула свои национальные границы и, по сути, во всех сферах, и в экономике, и в политике, и в гуманитарной сфере навязывается другим государствам. Ну, кому это понравится? Кому это понравится? Почему же сейчас?
My head snapped. It was so searing and blunt, and I felt this was the real guy.
И это, конечно, крайне опасно. И ведет к тому, что никто уже не чувствует себя в безопасности. Я хочу это подчеркнуть. Никто не чувствует себя в безопасности.
Putin echoed Cold War rhetoric by accusing the U.S. of making the world unsafe.
Premier Vladimir Putin left no doubt who he sees as responsible for the current global crisis.
Putin, clearly in this speech, was drawing a line and saying, we're not going to try anymore. We're just giving up on you, and we're going to make our own world in which we are the master.
It's one of Putin's harshest attacks on America in his 7-year term.
After that speech, we saw the first long-range nuclear bombers by Russia. We saw the devastating cyber attack in Estonia in 2007. We were starting to see steps taken that represented a Russia assertiveness that we had not seen. We did not necessarily understand that 2007 is the date where he wanted to stop that democratic encroachment.
The leaders of NATO begin a 2-day summit today.
It's been 6 years since the establishment of the NATO-Russia Council.
But Bush ignored Putin's warning.
Taken by this summit will affect the future of the alliance.
Ratcheting up the conflict, encouraging Georgia and Ukraine, two former Soviet republics, to join NATO.
We must make clear that NATO welcomes the aspirations of Georgia and Ukraine for their membership in NATO.
The Russians were obviously very, very concerned that the Bush administration was moving towards allowing both Georgia and Ukraine to get into NATO, which was for them a huge red line.
Putin rushed to Bucharest to confront Bush.
There's this amazing moment. Putin shows up early and crashes the dinner with the NATO members. He has basically shown up as the skunk in the garden and challenging them for what they've done.
In a meeting later, Putin was adamant to Bush. Georgia, and especially Ukraine, were in his sphere of influence.
He leaned over and said, Ukraine is not a real country. He had no respect for the sovereignty of the Ukrainian people. We should have seen it earlier. Maybe we didn't want to see it, but it was clear if we had wanted to see it, the direction that President Putin was going.
Putin made it clear he wouldn't accept Bush's plan for Georgia and Ukraine.
It basically waved the red flag in front of the bull. It was extremely provocative for Russia. It provoked Russia and made Russia angry.
Just 4 months later, Putin attacked Georgia.
Russian troops backed by tanks and armored vehicles.
The Russians were prepared and perhaps even eager for a conflict with Georgia.
There appeared to be little to stop the troops in their advance.
And part of that was motivated by, we're going to show the Georgians that getting too close to NATO has a price.
Russian planes again bombing Georgian.
Putin seized and held nearly 5,000 square miles of Georgian territory.
Another town is burning. More civilians have been killed.
From Putin's point of view, this wasn't just about Georgia.
A fierce battle broke out today on the fringe of the former.
This was about Ukraine. This was about what he saw to be the West's interest and, eventual expansion of NATO, potentially to include Ukraine and Georgia.
Some of those Georgian soldiers were saying, where is the United States?
As the war broke out, Vladimir Putin and George W. Bush happened to be at the Olympics in Beijing.
Bush finds himself at the Olympics sitting in the same row as Putin. He has his wife Laura and the King of Cambodia move aside so he can sit next to Putin and talk about it. But he knows the cameras are on him. So he's trying not to make it a big visible confrontation. But he's telling Putin, what are you doing here? This is not right. You can't be doing this. And Putin is basically telling him to butt out.
The president who had looked into Putin's soul had now reached a different conclusion about just who Vladimir Putin was.
I remember the president saying, I don't know how, but we've lost him. Putin was going in a different direction, and there was little that the administration and President Bush's mind could do to put Putin back on that course.
Nearing the